I'm this close to walking out of your stupid show, so don't push me. I'm literally taking the microphones off these people as they're performing. Bacon trees. So this is a bit of a rant video where I'm going to cover my worst gigs as a live sound / AV person. And I've done, quite a few of them, quite a number of shows. Most of them were great. Some very challenging, and some just absolutely sucked. Well, certain parts of them anyway, not the whole gig necessarily, but certain parts sucked. So, at my worst gigs ever, number 1, audiovisual in Las Vegas. I get handed a last-minute CD-ROM to play. Actually, it was a CD-ROM to play in front of a group of audiovisual professionals. Last minute, and I was like, I didn't get time to test this. It's okay. So I put it in the disk drive of the PC that was playing, and it played back really choppy, and people were like, this is unprofessional. And I'm sitting there going, why did you, I never do that. I never do untested media, not for playback. If somebody wants to stream something on YouTube, I download it first, and we play it right back from the hard drive. But it didn't work. It was choppy, and I got blamed for it at the end, and one of my colleagues wasn't sticking up for me, and the person was saying, this is totally unprofessional, blah, 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 blah. So people complained about that, and I felt like, I wish I could say something, but in those groups of people, you just kind of grin and bear it, let's just say. The 360 jazz drummer, whose name shall go unmentioned because that's not important. The important part is a lot of people do this. They don't hold a microphone properly. People complain. They can't hear. This sound system sucks, etc., etc. I'm sitting there, all the house lights up, going, just speaking in the microphone. So I picked up the microphone and I said, can you talk into the microphone? And he wasn't listening to me. And then somebody shouted out, hey, could you talk louder? And he said, talk to the engineer. And he pointed at me. And meanwhile, he's holding the microphone way down to his chest. It was, I had no problem with the MC holding the microphone right up to his mouth. But that moment, I just wanted to walk out of that venue. And I was like, again, grin and bear it. I'll share the responsibility. I could have asked more questions, etc. So partly, I'll blame myself. The punk show. Well, the one that ended up in a catastrophe where the scheduling was off and there were 6 punk bands playing. I think 2 or 3 were from Montreal, so they were from out of town. And they ran out of time on stage because they didn't have a good schedule. Meanwhile, I have to get out of there, and there's one more band about to perform. And they go on stage, and by the time they get on stage, it was like way after last call, so it's after 2 o'clock in the morning here. And the bar manager said, cut him off, stop it. I'm like, I cut him off right in the middle of this. They just started playing, so after a song or two, I just went up and started taking the microphones off everything while they were performing. This didn't go over well with the crowd, and they started, smashing things and swearing, and I got out of there in a hurry. Let's just say it was a pretty scary situation where I was like, okay, I'm just doing sound here. I'm not doing security or, I'm literally taking the microphones off these people as they're performing, and the last microphone was from the singer, and I just went, gotta do it. And he's like, fine. And then people just went nuts. I got out of there. I left the cables. I left the stands. I didn't care about those. I cared about the mics. Locked them up, got paid, got out of there. I did a show once where it was all pretty much playback to backing tracks. And people would bring me CDs, and I'd test them out, and I'd say, which track number? And they wouldn't write it down. They'd just say, track number 2, then track number 10, and I might do track number 8. Okay, so I'm writing that down. Somebody else hands me a CD. So they're all singers singing to backing tracks. I'm like, okay, track 2, track 3, and track 7, right? Okay, great. And your name is? Because they didn't give me that information either. I did this. I think I had about half a dozen, 6 or 7 CDs, and nobody showed up for sound check. I showed up early for sound check. Somebody convinced me to show up early for sound check, and I'm like, okay, well, it's just an extra $25, $30 for an extra hour or something like that. So I show up. Nobody's there. Last minute, they come in. They give me all these discs. I got to pile them. I'm making my own notes. And then I'm waiting for the cue, and I said, what's your cue for me to play the next track? And they'll just say, can you play the next track? I'm not mentioning the track number or anything. I'm like, okay, you just tell me when to press play. I'm waiting for, and sometimes they wouldn't do it. They'd just go, can you play the next track? And I'm like, remember the cue, you got to tell me when to play it. I don't want to play it while you're talking, while you're not ready. And then I remember somebody said, can you play the next track? And I'm like, okay, track number 10. And they go, no, this is track number 8, sound guy. And then people turned around and looked at me and went, sound guy. And I'm like, ugh. And then 2 people turned around and looked at me and said, you figure there'd be a sound check done at a show like this. And I was just about to lose it. Again, grin and bear it, don't lose it. Another time upstairs at the Mocambo, the promoter tried to book 2 shows on me, getting paid for 1. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm not working twice. and getting paid once. These are two separate shows. These are two separate pays. So I said, fine. And then the band was like, well, where were you? Where were you? My call time is 7:30. I didn't know there was a 7:30 start show, right? So they set up all the microphones completely wrong. I went up, reset them all. We did like an hour and a half show. And I did a sound check for the next show. And then I went out to get a coffee. And the promoter was like, oh, you got to get a coffee? What are you, a union member? And I'm like, hey, man, I'm this close to walking out of your stupid show, so don't push me, right? So I ended up getting paid for the dinner show and the night show. And at the very end of the night, he wants to fight me. He's got his tie wrapped around his head. He comes up to me, and he's drunk by now or on something. I'm not sure what he was on, but he said, oh, look at Mr. Union Guy with the union rules. And I'm like, just don't make me come over there. And I'm wrapping up my cables, and I think I had a cold starting or something, so I didn't really feel great. I just wanted to go home. And he kept pushing me, and I, not physically, just with his comments. And finally I went, don't you make me come over there. And he kept going on in my face, and he was about 8 feet away, and I dropped the cables and I rushed him, and the band grabbed him and they go, no, it's okay. And I'm like, I don't know what I would have done had they not pulled him away, but it didn't end up in a fight, but it wasn't a very good night for me. Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians playing downstairs at the Mocambo this time. So there's a few clubs that I've had several problems with, or at anyway. Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians, and I was like, Edie Brickell, cool. Well, that's going to be a good show. They had their own sound person, Paul Simon's sound person, because Edie and Paul were married, I guess, something like that. Anyway, the sound guy wasn't necessarily very nice to me, but that wasn't a big problem. They're playing, Edie Brickell's like a quieter act, and they're playing on stage, and everything's sounding good. I'm like, I'm glad to be part of the show, at least doing, helping with monitors and doing the stage and whatever. And all of a sudden, there's a metal band booked upstairs. I'm like, who would book a metal band when Edie Brickell is playing where clearly it's quiet music? Anyway, that wasn't a great show because people were like, what's going on here? And I felt bad, even though it had nothing to do with me. I didn't book the show. I wasn't doing sound, but it wasn't a great show to be at because of that. Oh, one last thing. I was at it was a May Day festival at the 360 Club in Toronto where I worked. I was a house sound person. And 2 weeks before, people come in and they're, speccing the place out. What kind of sound system do you got? Okay, I don't think this is going to do for our show. Our show's bigger. Fine. So they can bring in their own gear. They brought in all their own gear. They brought in all their own sound people. I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Just sit here and get paid for doing nothing, which I don't mind, but I actually like to work, right? So they brought their minions. One guy is like coordinating everybody. Okay, I need this, put this here. I need that, put there, blah, blah, blah. And at one point during setup, he points at me and he goes, Buck. And I was like, well, I don't respond to that. And I went, oh, screw you. I turned around. And he's like, where are you going? I'm like, you don't wag your finger at me. So I went to the bar and I said, listen, just pay me $40. I'll get out of your hair. These guys have everything anyway. I really don't need to be here. But if you want to pay me the whole 80, that's fine. So he paid me like $40 and I took off for the evening. Anyway, those are some of my worst experiences at live shows. I've had many of them. I've been part of well over 4,000 live events in total, many of those being mixing live sound or audio-visual or whatever. But so most of them, I'd say, were good, and some of them were I just wanted to leave and get out of there. I should mention my first solo gig ever where I wasn't looking over somebody's shoulder, big sound system, decent-sized club, and I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. And I'm walking down the street on my way to my first solo gig, and a friend of mine sitting on a patio who was a seasoned sound engineer said, hey, how's it going? And I go, hey, how are you? He goes, where are you going? I'm going to the 360. I'm mixing there tonight. And he goes, you're mixing there? And I go, yeah. He goes, you ever mix that room? And I'm like, no, well, yeah, I have. But now it's my first solo gig. He's like, ooh, okay, good luck. He was right. It was a nightmare. The band was I think they're called Black Cabbage or something. And they were switching acoustic instruments. Things are feeding back all over the place. It was just a nightmare. I just wanted to get out of there. But I'm like, no, I signed up for this. I'm going to stick with it and just do my best to deal with it. And I learned troubleshooting big time that one first night. But it was a horrible, horrible gig. I managed to smooth things out, maintain my composure. There's one thing I do when people are looking at me when they feel I'm not doing something right. Oh, this is in the early days of mixing anyway. I chew gum, move to the beat of the music, and I don't make eye contact, and people tend to leave me alone. And if they ask me I got used to doing this, and they ask me about a particular thing that's not sounding good or whatever in the system, and I say, actually, I got a broken potentiometer, and I'm working on the problem right now. So if you don't mind, tend to be like, oh, okay. So I just make up bullshit to get them off my back. I've done that several times, just bullshitted people. So I made a video a couple of years back about all the lies I told just to get people off my back. Anyway, that's all I got to say for my worst gigs ever. It wasn't really a rant. It just felt like I have to get this out because every gig is something different and you can't anticipate everything. You just have to be ready for anything. Anyway, cheers for now.